Welcome to the Inspired Impact Podcast, where dedicated female professionals share how they inspire impact every day. Authentic stories, passionate commitment, lives transformed. I'm your host, Judy Carlson. Welcome to today's episode of the Inspired Impact Podcast. Today's guest is a woman who has a passion for social impact and social enterprise. For 22 years, she led the Women's Bean Project, which provides transitional employment to women attempting to break the cycle of chronic unemployment and poverty. Whew! Tamra Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here with you.
I am so excited to learn more about who you are, how you got to be where you are, and all of these people that you've impacted over your life and career.
Well, I'm delighted to share. It's been quite a journey.
I can't wait. So where do you want to start?
Well, maybe we start with what attracted me to Women's Bean Project to begin with.
Okay, great.
In part because I'm not, by career, I'm not a nonprofit person.
Oh.
And so in fact, I started by getting 2 science degrees. And then I had an opportunity to work for a social enterprise that was a subsidiary of a hospital in Chicago.
Oh, wow.
And I liked the idea at the time that we were taking ideas from the medical center and taking them to market. And then I did that for a number of years, then worked in tech. And I was in tech from 1999 to 2003. And that was a really interesting time to be in that space.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the bubble was bursting and our company was becoming profitable during that time. And yet, while it was super exciting, I didn't have a connection to the community. And by then I'd moved back to Colorado. I'm a 5th generation Coloradan. And I really was craving a connection. So I started volunteering at Women's Bean Project. And I loved the idea that there was a business. There is a food manufacturing business with distribution all across the US. And the better the business does, the more women can be served. Wow. And I thought that was a really cool way to operate a business and have an impact on people's lives. And it was about as much knowledge as that at the beginning. It just seemed pretty intriguing. So I found out that they were looking for a CEO as a volunteer. I went on to the search committee, and then I tried to talk a girlfriend of mine into applying for the job. And according to her, I went on and on about what a great place it was until finally she said, "Why don't you apply?" Wow. It's just, it's silly. You're trying to sell me on this. I think you're meant for this. And my first response was, "I'm not a nonprofit person." And she said, "It's a business." And which is funny because that's what I liked about it to begin with.
So we know how.
Yes, exactly. So we know how it turned out. I was the CEO. I just recently stepped down. I was the CEO for almost 22 years to the day.
Wow.
Which is bananas to think about because you never start a job. I don't think anymore. You don't start a job ever thinking 22 years. And I think initially, what I loved about the organization from the outside, I began to really love from the inside because once I was in the organization, I got to meet the women. And so it was very abstract from the outside, but then I got to meet the women as they first started in the program. And at that point, they weren't really sure what was going to happen. But they were hoping that their life could be different as a result of the Bean Project. And then over a period of 6 to 9 months, that's how long the program is. And so it's 6 to 9 months of employment and program services and stabilization. I literally got to watch women blossom. Really? And I think, there's not very many jobs, even in the nonprofit world, where you get to see the impact so directly. And that's really what got me hooked. Is that, as I was there longer, I'd see women who had graduated years before. And maybe when they were at Women's Bean Project, they had really young kids. And then they're, 10 years later, their kids never knew a time when their mom didn't work, or they were graduating from college at the same time as their kids. Wow. Or, there were just so many amazing things that happened as a result of their time at Women's Bean Project. And so that's a big part of what kept me there. And also, I started in a situation where it really needed to be turned around and grown. So during my tenure, we grew 10x from the starting point. And we, a couple of years ago, moved to a new building where, and a month later, we were able to pay off the bridge loan. And so going from a financial crisis to this place where the organization was really solid, it occurred to me last year, now is a good time, right? Like I have done my work and it's time to see what someone else can do.
Wow. So how do women find out about the project?
A pretty wide variety of ways. Women's Bean Project was founded in 1989. And so it's very well known in the community, and particularly for women experiencing chronic unemployment. So often, most common ways a woman finds us is by being referred from someone else who's been in the program. And somewhat that's an indicator of intergenerational poverty too, because we would have a woman and her aunt and her cousin and her sister, over the years. Recently, there was a woman whose aunt and mother-in-law had both been in the program previously. Wow. And so on the one hand, that's really awesome that we could be there for multiple generations. On the other hand, I think that I wanted to make sure that I went to work every day trying to ensure we provided services so effective and far-reaching that every woman who came to us was the last in her family to need us. Wouldn't it be awesome to run out of chronically unemployed women in Denver? Right. And we'd have to do something crazy like hire men. I thought a lot about that. But back to the referral sources, it's also the justice system. Might be a parole officer or a judge. There are lots of relationships with housing partners. And the great thing about that is when someone's in a housing program, Women's Bean Project provides case management while they're working. The housing project provides case management while they're at home. So that wraparound support is really beneficial.
Wow, for sure. So they find out about it, and is there some type of a process they go through to see if they qualify for the program?
Yeah, there's an application process, just like any job. They can either fill it out online or go in person to fill out the application. And then we hire 4 times a year. And every time it's time to hire, we go through all the applications we've received since the last hire date. And screen them and then reach out to them and do a phone screening. And a big part of that is to make sure that the timing is right for them. So in a phone screen, they might share that they're looking for a job, after the summer's over because they have to be with their kids. So the July hire date wouldn't be the right one, but we might encourage them to apply for the September one. We're also trying to assess readiness for change, because Women's Bean Project isn't a place women come to stay the same. Because staying the same hasn't worked for them.
Yeah, that's right.
And so one of the criteria is that a woman who is hired typically wouldn't have had a job longer than a year in her lifetime. So the average age is 38.
I was going to ask.
So when you think about that in terms of, think about, how many different jobs or how many years you'd worked by the time you were 38. So there's a lot of trauma. More than 90% of the women hired at the Bean Project have felony backgrounds. Most have spent time in prison. They're perhaps trying to get custody of their kids back. There's so many things that have gotten in the way of their ability to get and keep employment. We're looking for women who are ready for that to be different.
Wow.
So then from that screening, there is an in-person interview. It's a group interview day in that a group of women are invited to come. And then they have one-on-one interviews. And so then from there, they are hired or made an offer. What ends up happening today, less than 10% of applicants are hired.
Wow.
So from, a pool of 200, then that narrows down to maybe 40 are invited for the group interview day. And then from there, 10 to 12 are hired. It is, and what that ends up doing is, I think the women who are then hired realize it's kind of like winning the lottery a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that recognizing that this is your shot, this is your opportunity, and you were chosen, I think sort of helps with the success as well.
Sure.
And the desire to stick with it, because they know that the spot they're in is precious.
So then every quarter, about 10 to 12 are hired. So it's kind of a rolling 6 to 9 months of women.
Yes. So it's a cohort model. So if the women who were hired in February are all going through the program together, those who are hired in May, et cetera.
Gotcha.
And the tricky part of trying to operate a business and a program at the same time is that the hiring really needs to be relative to the anticipated business needs. Because you don't want to hire a bunch of women. It'd be awesome to hire 30 women at a time, but because of the cost of labor.
Yeah.
And we're in Denver County, so it's expensive, and because of the cost of labor, and also because you need work. It's not a job if there's not work to do.
That's right.
So the leading indicator for success for Women's Bean Project and how many women are hired is sales or projected sales. Okay. And that's also a really interesting thing, because on the one hand, the model for the program is very inefficient. We are intentionally hiring women. We don't know if they're going to come to work every day. Almost by definition, they're going to have challenges. Because if they didn't have challenges related to going to work, they wouldn't need to go to Women's Bean Project.
There you go.
And so it's trying to find that balance. And yet at the same time, because Women's Bean Project is an employer, there are a lot of questions that would be nice to know before they come on board, but you can't ask.
Wow.
And so you're trying to assess readiness for change based on what kinds of messages they're sending during the interview process. Right. It's a super interesting and challenging way to run a business.
I can't even imagine all the different facets that you've gotten into. So there must be a sales department that rolled up to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting model, because it's like having two businesses under one roof. So there is sales and then fundraising, because the sales cover about 50 to 60% of the operating budget.
Okay.
And the women spend 70% of their paid time. They're hired for a full-time job. 70% of their paid time on balance is spent working in the business in some way. So that could be on the production line or in the shipping department, or at the front desk working the retail store. It could be anything related to the production and the sales. Then 30% of their paid time is in program activities, where they're, as the CEO, I thought a lot about, that's kind of non-revenue generating activity.
Yep.
And yet we were still paying them, and then paying providers or partners to come in for some of the programming. So we would fundraise to cover that portion.
Okay.
So there's kind of two sales departments. One is fundraising and one is sales in the traditional sense. And then there's the operations side of the business, which, all of the sales creates the work for the operations. And then there's the programming side of the business.
And do the programming activities take place at the same place that their work takes place?
Yes. And that is actually one of the things I think that works really well for Women's Bean Project. Some of our peers around the country are kind of forced to separate the two, perhaps because the work that the transitional, what we refer to the women as transitional employees, because they're in a program that does not last more than 9 months.
Right.
Those transitional employees, maybe they're going out and doing landscaping or neighborhood cleanup. And so the programming has to be kind of divorced from the work. In our case, we can have the women can work on the production line all morning and then be in a computer skills class in the afternoon. And that's really nice from just from a management standpoint and efficiency standpoint, to be able to split their time under one roof. It also means you have to have a much larger facility than you might otherwise.
Right. So so is there like a curriculum for the program activities? And
yes.
How do you manage, the periodic hires and the program activities so that everybody eventually gets through all of them, or maybe they don't?
Well, hopefully they do.
Okay.
I was going to joke and say very carefully.
Yeah, it must be quite a management of
Yes.
people.
Well, there are phases to the program. So the first 30 days is phase one, and that's stabilization. And so during that time, it's almost exclusively programming. And it's things that are really about basic needs and things that will get in the way, whether it is what I think of more as the psychosocial barriers to employment. So, for instance, even understanding that in all my previous jobs, when my supervisor spoke to me in that way, it made me quit. And so then what would happen at Women's Bean Project is they would do some exploration of what their triggers for trauma are, what past trauma, and be able to then make the association. Oh, now I understand. Right. That reminds me of this past traumatic experience, and that's why I would always quit. Or conflict and how they have managed conflict in the past. And then also during that time, we're working really hard to make sure that all their basic needs are stable. So stable housing, safe and stable transportation, a safe place for their kids to go every day. So that first 30 days is really all about that. Okay. And we use a tool to measure that, because those aspects are referred to as self-sufficiency. Okay. And ultimately, the goal is to move the women towards self-sufficiency. Sure. And so there's a tool that's used. It's 18 measures of self-sufficiency on a 5-point scale. Wow. And at the beginning, one day in, every woman completes this self-sufficiency scale, and then that helps decide what each woman needs to work on. Because, of course, no two women are going to be alike. Right. If somebody is the average age 38 and her first child was when she was 16, she might have grown children who also have children. However, if she's in her early 20s, she may or may not have kids. She may or may not have custody of her kids. So it's every woman's needs are different. Wow. Then after that first phase, phase 2 is really the longest phase. It goes from months 2 through 6. And there's specific programming that happens during that time. Okay. And it's really about, we think a lot about soft skills. And I mean that in the traditional sense that your listeners might think of, as well as things that we would define as soft skills. So there is a whole series on adult literacy and numeracy. I kind of believe that almost all Americans could improve their reading and their math skills. Absolutely. And so we have a series. And if getting her GED during the time she's at Women's Bean Project is realistic, a woman would also get support in getting her GED. Wow. There's also computer skills. And again, we're meeting every woman where she is. If we have a woman who's in her 50s, she never had a computer during her time in school. And she might have a smartphone, but understanding how to create a resume, how to attach that resume to an email, how to apply for a job online, really basic Excel skills. Those are things that they'll work on. And as well as continuing to work on communication skills, how to interview for a job, what are employers looking for, how to show up. So it's a pretty wide variety of different things. At 6 months, then they move into phase 3, which is then when they're starting their transition out. So anytime between the beginning of month 7 and the end of month 9, they might leave us. And during that time, it's about learning the skills of job search. And we think about it as a toolbox, and you're putting lots of tools in your toolbox. The important thing about the toolbox metaphor is that they take the toolbox with them. And so they're taking the skills with them. So we're not finding them the next job. We're helping them learn the skills of how you find a job, because they can do that again and again and again.
If they graduate, do they, like, what percentage of them do have a job to go to?
Oh, all of them.
All of them do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so for us, it's also then, it's about their progress during the program. In addition to that self-sufficiency matrix, there's a job readiness assessment that's done monthly. Okay. And that's measuring progress in job readiness on about 10 different measures. And then it's, completing the program is, of course, an important milestone. But I want to know how much she makes when she leaves in that next job. Does she have get promotions? Does that first job work out? Because a lot of times she'll choose a job, maybe that's not so great, but she's worried that she's not going to get a job. So she takes one that's just so-so, and it doesn't last. So we track at 6, 12, 18, and 24 months after the woman leaves us. And we pay her just to check in. We pay $50 at 6 and 12 months, $75 at 18 months, and $100 at 2 years just to check in.
Wow. That's awesome.
And why that's important is because we want to know what progress she's made. We want to make sure she's still employed. It doesn't have to be the same job, because, again, she has the skills to find a job. And what we've found, and one of the things that put Women's Bean Project on the map nationally, is over 95% of women are still employed at 1 year.
Okay. Wow.
And so, when you look at that compared to the fact that one of the criteria when she starts is typically she wouldn't have had a job longer than a year in her lifetime.
Okay, right.
And then recently we were able to get wage data from the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, which ultimately that's truly the best measure.
Right.
And we were able to compare Social Security numbers to the data they had in their system. So anybody who's driving Uber or something like that, who's a W-9, wouldn't show up.
Right.
But we were able to look at 8 quarters before the women started at the Bean Project, and then 12 quarters after. So far after the time that they left the Bean Project.
Yeah.
And what we saw was that before they came to the Bean Project, there were very few matches, which would make sense, because if she's not employed, her Social Security the number is not going to be in the system.
Right.
It was like less than 25% of the women matched, and that was at some point in those 8 quarters.
Right.
And then after the Bean Project, over 90% matched. Wow. And what we saw was a median wage increase of 181%.
Oh my gosh.
And that's anybody who came through the program.
Wow.
Of course, right away, I started thinking, well, wouldn't it be really interesting to look at like the length of time in the program and what that did to wages? But then I think I discouraged the researchers, because they were like, you'd have no idea what it took for us to do this
get what
report.
we got. Yeah.
Because immediately I was like, and then we could.
Right. Yep.
But, I'm still very proud of that, because that truly is demonstrable.
It
right?
is.
Like we were able to show that that the program, for the vast majority of the women who go through the program, it makes a difference.
For the people who are doing the programs, are those outside people that either are paid or volunteer their time to be part of these programs with the women?
Yeah, so it's a combination. Sometimes it's internal staff who does some of it. Sometimes it is, so for the math and reading skills, that's an organization we contract with. We have a relationship with Dress for Success, and they come in and do and offer a series around what employers are looking for. And
that's great.
I think it's also helpful for the women to hear from more than just us, and also to feel this sense that there are lots of people in the community who are contributing. So then we also have a dental hygienist who comes in once a quarter, who just cleans women's teeth and takes Medicaid. So that's how she gets paid. So it's free service to the Bean Project.
Okay.
We have an optometrist who does eye exams and makes sure every woman who needs glasses has them. So it's a pretty wide variety of different program services. And some are led by people from companies where the company signs up for a corporate sponsorship and then they bring employees in, for instance, to do financial literacy.
Sure.
Or for computer skills.
Yeah.
So it's, let's just say we're very creative with how we do the programming.
Yeah.
And I just think it's important to engage community members.
For sure.
Because ultimately, if a woman, I believe if you change a woman's life, you change your family's life.
Oh, for sure.
And when you change a family's life, that makes our community better.
It does. Yeah.
Because her kids are the future of our community.
Yeah. What was my next question? I just have so many floating through my mind here. Don't remember what my next question was, but I do want to ask you about the books you've written. Would this be a good time to talk about those? Okay.
Sure. My first book is called The Third Law, and I wrote it because what I saw when I first started at the Bean Project, first of all, I was really confronted with a lot of biases and prejudices I didn't even know I had before I went in. And it was because, I grew up a middle-class white girl in Colorado Springs, and I didn't have a reason to know why, for instance, so many women were ending up in prison. Right. I didn't have a reason to understand that. And one of the things that really struck me is that you could look at a woman who comes to the Bean Project and say she made bad choices. But it's never as simple as that, because a lot of times that bad choice maybe was the best of 5 bad choices. Right. So I really felt like I wanted to find a way to share what I had learned in the most humble way I could, while in the context of telling the women's stories. Because the reason I learned the things I did was because I was curious and I asked questions and I saw the women's struggles. So throughout the book, it addresses the various challenges the women face. Okay. And I talk about their internal demons because sometimes it is her lack of belief she's worthy of a better life that gets in her way. And then also societal obstacles where she's doing everything she can, or she's being asked to. She's keeping a job. She's, feeding her kids, etc. And then all of a sudden she starts to make money and they cut her off at the knees. That's one of the challenges in our system is that there is not tapering of benefits. They are true cliffs. Sure. And all you have to do is make $1 too much to lose that benefit. And as I was learning these things, I thought, there are other people who are like me who don't know this also. For sure. And so that book was really kind of a labor of love in that regard, which is I have an opportunity to help tell the women's stories. And so there are 75 different women's stories in the book. And the book culminates in the story of my husband and I adopting a child. And he came to our family when he was 2, and his birth mother could have easily been a woman at the Bean Project. Okay. And that was never planned, and it was just one of those things that happened. We had a daughter already, and so it really needed to be a part of this story, because I think that through working at Women's Bean Project, we became the kind of people who would adopt a child. Yeah, and I don't know that we were before that. Okay. The demons, the mental game, the not feeling worthy, is that all flushed out in the first 30 days? And are there professionals there to help them overcome some of that? It definitely takes longer than the first 30 days. Okay. It really is about coming to what we call a safe and accepting work environment. Okay. And where many women have said to me, this is the first time that somebody's been more focused on my future than my past. Oh, because by the time they come to the Bean Project, they've been told all the things they can't do. That's right. And now we're saying, okay, so Yeah. So there's some things that you may not be able to do, but let's focus on what your skills and talents are and help you imagine what your next chapter could look like. And they start to have some successes where they, you know, they're setting goals and they're accomplishing some amazing things. And so that by the time they leave the Bean Project, they believe they're worthy of a better life.
Wonderful.
And I think that's a hard thing to measure, but you sure know it when you see it.
Wow.
So there are a couple of social workers on staff, and then every woman has a case manager who is a master's of social work intern.
Oh, okay.
And so there are a lot of social workers around.
Okay. And you find a bunch of them, huh?
Yeah. And I think it's the social work is an important part because social workers, they're not studying to be therapists. Some may end up doing therapy, but during the time that they're at the Bean Project, they're really learning about systems. And I think that systems thinking is really important for the Bean Project, because what I think too often what happens is, whether it's legislation or it is services, everything's siloed, and we're not thinking about things in terms of how people are part of systems. Sure. And it shows up in terms of the benefits, and also, their involvement with the justice system. So they have, their parole officer, and then they have their case manager for food stamps or SNAP. They have their case manager for their housing. And none of this is treated as a system. These are all being treated, in silos. Wow. So a little bit of a soapbox thing for me, just in general, is to begin to think about human services and employment in general, and economic mobility as a system.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense.
It does, but I haven't made a lot of progress yet. But maybe when your podcast airs.
And they'll hear it from that. That's good. Yeah, no, I mean, I understand that. I understand the silo thing versus the overarching piece of it. Do they know what kind of a job they could get or want to get, or when they're in the process? I mean, because everybody's got different passions, different skills. So how's that direction for the women carried out?
Well, that's part of the process also. Okay. And that's the third phase of the program, is because, you think about, we have women who come to the Bean Project with a third grade reading level, and we have others who have completed college. And the job prospects for those two people, regardless of their background, are going to be very different. So the work at Women's Bean Project is making food products. They might go on to food manufacturing, but that's not really the point. The point is the skills of coming to work every day and on time and all of those things. And then we work with each woman to help her identify her talents and skills. And sometimes she has an idea of what she wants to do. We had a woman a couple of years ago who had, during her addiction, she'd lost her insurance license. And all she really wanted was to get that back. And then there was recently a woman who graduated who thought that she had been a cosmetologist in the past, and she thought maybe she'd go back to that. And then she, during the time she was at the Bean Project, she was diagnosed with breast cancer and had treatment. So she ended up going and working for a mammography center.
Oh, wow.
And so, just like for anybody, that your personal experiences inform the kind of job you want to have, your education level, your skills. And so the women do an assessment.
Okay.
And that and then from that, it's assessing talents and skills. And then it literally spits out a list of possible jobs, which I love, because then it's coming from a place of possibility rather than limitation.
Absolutely.
The other part of that third phase is that every woman is assigned a job coach, and that's a volunteer from the community who works one-on-one with her to help her prepare her resume, help her coach her when she's getting ready for interviews, help her look for jobs. All of that support comes from that job coach, in addition to all the services that the Bean Project is providing.
So does that job coach meet with that woman at the facility that she works at, and they come?
Yep, they come for an hour a week. And so it's a pretty significant volunteer commitment. Yeah. And yet I'll tell you that the people who do it love it.
Yeah.
And as soon as they have someone who completes the program, they're ready to have the next woman assigned.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Because it's, again, just like working in a nonprofit, a lot of times in your volunteer work, you don't get to see the impact on the individual. I mean, that's just not as common in volunteering.
Yeah. Wow. How do you run the fundraising arm of your business?
Well, we are big believers in lots of events. So there is one big event a year.
Okay.
It's called Ready, Set, Grow, and it happens in April.
Okay.
And it's a graduation celebration and fundraising luncheon.
Okay.
And some of your listeners may have been to events before where there is it's a free event to attend, and there's a person who is referred to as a table captain, and their job is to invite 9 people to join them after hopefully they've had some introduction to the organization. And so that's the model Women's Bean Project uses.
Okay.
About 500 people in a room.
Nice.
And it's, it's not the same model as selling tickets. This is kind of a 9-month cultivation process to get people in the room on that day and then ask them for money.
Sure.
But if we've done it well, they're ready.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a surprise.
Sure.
And so that's a big part of it. Then the Bean Project's fortunate to be supported by lots of foundations. So there are a number of grants. And then there are, several thousand individual donors who support the organization. Wow. So it's a pretty, a pretty diverse, funding.
Yeah.
It's has not historically been dependent on government funds, which, in this current environment is a good thing.
It is a good thing. Yeah. You've mentioned a couple times like other projects around the country. So like, how do you know about all of them, or are you all connected, or do you all go to a conference once a year to, swap stories and learn?
Well, it's a combination of things. Fairly early on, I realized that the things I woke up every morning worried about as the CEO of a social enterprise were not necessarily the same things as someone who was in more a traditional nonprofit organization.
For sure.
And so I started looking for groups around the country to knowledge share with. I also always have the mentality that whatever problem we have, somebody else has had it already.
Sure.
And so even if their solution didn't work, I'd love to know what it is. So, we could try something different.
Right.
So we found a group. There is an organization called the Social Enterprise Alliance, which is social enterprises all across the U.S. And then there are some similar organizations internationally. The UK actually has a very robust social enterprise ecosystem. So the US is still learning a lot from them. And then there is an organization out of California that specifically supports employment social enterprises. So the kinds of social enterprise Women's Bean Project is. Okay. And so we do get together and we knowledge share, and I do some coaching for other social enterprises that are maybe trying to expand their business line or are trying to launch a business, a new business. And so that's been really fun to get connected with people all across the country. There are not a ton of women only serving employment social enterprises. Okay. Women's Bean Project is, at least in terms of being large enough to be on the radar, maybe there's a dozen across the US where they only serve women.
Okay.
And so that, so it's important to know other organizations so that you can knowledge share.
Absolutely.
Because there are things that are specific to women.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I could just keep on asking you questions because you're so full of knowledge and experience, and I love this conversation. So what if someone wanted to get involved in the Women's Bean Project? What would the best way for them to do that be?
One of the best ways to get engaged initially is to go for a tour. And there are tours on the first Friday of every month at noon. And Women's Bean Project's location is 1300 West Alameda Avenue in Denver. And so it's a couple blocks west of I-25 on Alameda.
Oh,
super great location, parking lot and everything. And the way to let them know that you'd be going for a tour is tours@womensbeanproject.com.
Okay.
Or there is a place on the website, which is womensbeanproject.com, where you can RSVP for a tour. So that's a really great first step, because if you were to contact Women's Bean Project and say, I'm kind of interested in volunteering, they're going to invite you for a tour.
Perfect. That's a great way to kind of capsulize it once a month.
Yeah, once a month, first Friday of every month at noon, and then it lasts 1 hour. So we really are conscientious about being respectful of people's time.
Okay, and the women are working there at
the women are working. They're all good tours start and end in the gift shop, so you can pick up some snacks and some other goodies.
Okay. That sounds great. I might have to get a group of people to come on a tour.
Oh, I think they'd like it. I mean, I think it's cool to see. Well, first of all, you walk in and you smell the great smells of. Well, I didn't smell them after a while, but I'm told there's cumin and, some really awesome smells in the facility. And then we intentionally built the facility to overlook the production floor. And that's when you really get a sense of, holy cow, this is a legit manufacturing operation.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, that's great. Terrific. Well, is there anything else you want to share before we close today, Tamra?
I think I'd just like to say that for the people who are listening, that Women's Bean Project is successful because of support from the community. And that support can look like a lot of different things. It can look like buying the product, because sales create jobs. And so one way to support the organization is to buy the product. And the great thing is it's yummy food. And then you have to get more.
Right. That's right.
So you create more jobs, or give the product as gifts, send it to people around the country. And that's really how the Bean Project has grown, because then those people become customers and they do the same thing, and it just grows and grows. And Women's Bean Project is in stores all across the US.
Wow.
So that is really, I'd love for people to finish at the end of listening to this, know that there are lots of ways to support the organization, and buying the product is a fantastic way.
Sure. Yeah. And that's an easy way for people to do it, right? Yeah. That's great. Wow. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom and sharing everything. I loved hearing from you, Tamra, and looking forward to what's ahead for the Women's
it's great
Bean
to be
Project.
with you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us for the Inspired Impact podcast. To listen to past episodes, please visit theinspiredImpactPodcast.com.